Coup Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Ming of Revolution. I got a World War III alert and update. Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Well, I told y'all Donald Trump was trapped. The Zionists have him right where they want him. And there's nothing he can do about it. Let's get into the content. Revolutionary salute.
As we look at what's happening in the Pentagon. So the Israel lobby is working overtime right now to destroy the anti-war team that Trump has assembled at the Pentagon. And of course, we learned over the past few days that this team of Tulsi Gabbard, of Pete Hegseth, of Susie Wiles, and others forced his hand. I don't know if he really forced his hand. It seemed like he didn't want to do it in the first place, to kind of push him to make sure that he's not actually going to attack Iran, or at least be party to an attack against Iran. Now, we've learned here at Redacted that former Israeli Mossad agents are working overtime on both social media and behind the scenes, trying to discredit Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. Neocon Mike Waltz has now hired basically a dual citizen and former IDF official to work under him. And 3 anti-war DOD officials were just fired. Friend of the show, Tucker Carlson, just interviewed one of them. That man sitting there with Tucker is Dan Caldwell. And I want you just to watch Tucker's summary of what just happened to Dan Caldwell. I think he sums it up perfectly. Watch.
Dan Caldwell is a Marine Corps veteran who wound up until 3 days ago advising the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, on military policy. He was one of the strongest voices in the U.S. government and the Trump administration against the war with Iran. And his rationale was simple.
Yeah.
It's not in America's interest, and many Americans will die, and billions will be spent on a war we don't need to fight. And as someone who fought in Iraq, he was able to take that case to the principals with some force. Then 3 days ago, he was fired from the Pentagon, but not for his views on Iran. No.
Trump played himself putting this bigot in his place, this so-called Christian crusader. Out of hell with Pete Hegseth. I'm glad to see he a big sucker and a fool, like I always knew he would. They talking about DEI hire. Well, this affirmative action clown never deserved the job, was unfit for the job. You see, these people always whining about somebody getting a job they don't deserve when they put this bozo into a position he didn't deserve. You want to talk about endangering America? When they put this sucker in charge, they was endangering America. And guess what? Israel is showing the world that. You want to go along with bombing Iran? We're going to show the whole world that they got a fool in charge of the motherfucking Pentagon. There ain't no getting around it. He talking about secret shit online with his wife, his brother, all kind of people. Like, what the fuck? He's trying to get you a book. See, when people like him get in office, they try to get their book deals together. So he putting classified information in places his wife and brother can see it, so they prepare shit for later on when his book and the movie come out about this shit. This real talk. Israel just showing it the whole world that Trump, you go along with me. This is light work. They'll start whacking these people.
Oh, Dan Caldwell was fired because, reporters are told off the record, he had leaked classified documents to the media. But what were these classified documents exactly? Well, no one at the Pentagon could know the answer to that because Dan Caldwell's phone was never examined, nor was he given a polygraph. So actually, beneath the headlines was nothing other than a false accusation. Was Dan Caldwell fired because he opposed the push to war with Iran? You decide.
You decide. What do you guys think? Well, Lieutenant Colonel Dan Davis knows a thing or two about being canceled by being anti-war, specifically anti-war with Iran. He almost worked for the Trump administration until the neocons and Israel lobby made sure that he certainly didn't. Lieutenant Colonel Dan Davis joins us now. Colonel, great to see you. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Well, we've been wanting to have you on for a long time. Schedules conflicted. I think you had a live show simultaneously, so we couldn't get you on live with us. So it's a thrill to have you here. First of all, just at a high level, what do you think is going on at the Pentagon? I don't, is our assessment correct? Do you think that the Israeli lobby, the neocons, are actively trying to undermine President Trump and Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth?
I don't have visibility on what may be happening, but I have very strong clarity on what the results are. And there is unequivocal. I watched that.
Block this man right here from getting in. He was supposed to be advising Tulsi Gabbard, as Tulsi Gabbard advised Donald Trump, Lieutenant Daniel Davis. But too much going against the small hats. Even on YouTube, you're going to get the job in the U.S. government, but they want to say they're not in power. If you're on YouTube, you go against genocide, you can lose your job as an American. This man right here didn't get the job. And that's what I say. That's when I say Trump name is weak. Why are you letting Benjamin Netanyahu tell you who you can and can't have in your fucking government?
Interview with Dan Caldwell on Tucker's show. I saw it unfold myself. And any time that you have a situation where you're being accused of leaking classified information, and now then it looks like Hegseth himself is kind of caught up into this
he did it.
Probably a no-win situation, and he's not playing it well, I got to say, because now he's accusing Caldwell and all three of these guys of leaking classified information and disgruntled employees and all that. And listen, I can tell you, if you're accused of doing something, violating an issue with classified information, that's jail time. That's not just being fired. And the fact that they didn't even look at his phone, he wasn't charged with anything, he wasn't even told with it, that tells you that there's no substance there. And so then the only thing left is there must be some policy issue. And when all of these guys were definitely in the camp that don't go down this path to military confrontation with Iran because it would be catastrophic for our interest. Forget about Iran, frankly, but even for ourselves, it would be terrible. And with these guys were known as that position, and they were all the ones that were let go, then something else is going on.
Well, you had the mainstream media. Sorry, I just want to say the mainstream media jumped right all over this story. I had someone in the chat room just saying, hey, I've never watched your show before, but this guy clearly leaked information. You guys are spewing BS. Basically, this person saw it in the mainstream media. So the mainstream media, spread this information immediately, but they don't have any facts. Where are their sources on it? His phone wasn't used. They did not charge him with anything. So where is the mainstream media getting this BS story from?
And can I follow up before you move on? Because you said that Pete Hegseth is not handling this well. What should we be hearing from him? What could he do better?
Listen, I know
he can't be blaming everybody, talking about this the same media who told us Russiagate. This is the same. He's blaming every fucking body. Nobody told you to be talking about bombing Yemen in a signal chat with your wife and your brother. So if you're talking about this type of shit with your wife and your brother, obviously you cooking something up to put in the book. That's what people got to understand. Nobody has told me that, and I haven't heard nobody say that. What I'm saying is, if you're putting that type of information in a private chat with your wife or your brother, y'all bastards. I know y'all not selling intelligence. No, that was going to go in his book. See, he don't give a damn. He's not thinking about nothing but making money on the side. And that's what happens when you put a clown like that in the office. He trying to get rich.
Caldwell, I've known him for 7 or 8 years, and he has been at the height of following the rules, of being terribly dedicated to the country. Obviously, he's a combat veteran himself, has never shown anything except the highest of standards of morality, integrity, etc. So when I first heard this, I knew something was off right away. And because he had shown such loyalty to Hegseth and had followed him in there and taken this job, and he knew Caldwell did when he went into this, as all of us did who were even up for any of these positions. We knew the headwinds we would be going up against, and he was willing to take that chance. And unfortunately, I didn't see loyalty in the other direction. I think that Hegseth should have told whoever was behind all this stuff that they needed to just freaking pound sand. Because consider this, Hegseth is the number 2 guy in the chain of command for the United States Armed Forces. So if it wasn't the number 1 guy, President Trump would put pressure on him. and I see no evidence it was,
I want to
then
say,
who else?
these people humiliate themselves before the world, bro. They get to firing. He get to firing black people who had way more rank. They fired one black general. He's a bootleg shoe shiner, but he had way more rank and credibility than this clown. But he's going there with that attitude, that privileged attitude. It showed he incompetent, and I love it. I love it. We didn't have to. They told us, y'all voted for Trump. What he got to say about this? I ain't got to say shit. The Most High gonna expose these phonies for going against what they supposed to be doing. That man don't know nothing. That man don't know absolutely nothing about that job. That's why the only thing he worried about is being in that group chat, texting bullshit, talking to his wife, his brother. They having a ball. It's like a movie. He get to play general. You see? He can't believe Trump put him in this goddamn position. Well, I could believe he done it, and it's all falling apart all around him.
Had the power and the pressure to compel Hegseth to let go somebody who was tremendously loyal to him. That's the part I think he's misplayed. He should have stood up and said, no, y'all pound sand. This ain't happening.
I think the deep state is actively working to undermine President Trump. I think it's clear as day what's going on right now. I don't understand. I can't wrap my head around what you just said, which is if he's the head of the Pentagon, he's the Secretary of Defense. How do three guys who advise him get fired and he doesn't have really a say in it?
Right.
I would love to see by the end of the week these guys get reinstated. To me, that's like the ultimate power play because all of the media, like the Mossad agents who have taken over social media and the bot army that's out there now pushing this narrative about Hegseth. You can see it in action, by the way, and you can see the counts that are actually posting this. They're former Israeli Mossad agents. They're all pushing the same thing, that Hegseth will be out by the end of the week. Wouldn't the ballsy move here for the Trump administration to rehire these people?
That would be a ballsy move. I would like to see it. Anything that pushes back on. Look, I have to confess, I don't have any knowledge about Mossad agents or any of this other stuff that you're talking about there, but I can see unequivocally some big power is exerting pressure on the United States Department of Defense that's causing the Secretary of Defense to take action that doesn't really make any sense on the surface of it.
And he was kissing Israel ass. He swore allegiance to Israel. He's a Christian Zionist crusader. But when the time came for that big war against Iran, they said, oh, hell no. This is what this is all about. All of this is happening because they backed down to really go to war with Iran because Iran wasn't playing. Like, fuck it, let's do this shit, man. We ready to die. What y'all talking about? And the U.S. was really bluffing. They just trying to make Iran capitulate. Iran ain't doing no capitulating. Benjamin Netanyahu not playing. They want to destroy Iran at all costs. They don't give a fuck if the world got to end. They some lunatics. The U.S. got caught bluffing, and you can't bluff with the Benjamin Netanyahu and them lunatics. So they exposing them. Don't play with us. Don't swear loyalty to us forever and kiss our ass and then say no war. Hell no. They'll get your ass up out of here. Or, like I said, they'll whack you. They not your friend. They don't go shit about America. They don't give a fuck about this little Zionist Christian boy. They destroying him before the whole world. Now these people complaining, oh, Mossad. He was kissing their ass. They don't have time to cuddle him.
And I would love to see him bow up and say, no, you know what? Our investigation did not reveal anything. We checked into it, and these guys have been faithful to their jobs, and they're going to be rehired. Now, whether they would do it and come back is a separate issue because some of those bridges may have been burned, but I'd like to see them do something to take power back for our country.
By Zionists.
Now I'm going to offer you this glass half full interpretation, and let me know if you think this is naive, because I have noticed that as the negotiations with Iran continue to be productive, according to the Trump administration.
And excellent. Their words were excellent.
Right. That the crescendo of pro-war rhetoric is ramping up. And so we see attacks on Joe Rogan that they think that they can sort of tamp down his anti-war stance against Iran. We see attacks on people in and around the inner circle that are against a war with Iran. But it seems like because we have the agency of social media, people are not buying it. So is it possible that this is the first lie-based war that is thwarted because of independent media? What do you think of that?
Well, I certainly hope that's the case. I actually had on my own show earlier this afternoon, I had Doug McGregor on, and we were talking about this very issue here. And I showed a couple of clips from, two of the biggest warmongers there are in former General Jack Keane and Senator Tom Cotton, who have just been going over the top, talking about how we should be afraid of Iran, and they have this existential threat, which is complete military nonsense. And we totally shredded that military argument on it at its surface here. But we have seen, because Trump himself on March 7th, I think it was, from the Oval Office, made it sound like we had made the decision to go to war with Iran. And then now that since he's had a change of heart and he's like saying, no, let's try this negotiations. And I think it has a shot at success. And we're doing everything we can to encourage that path, because that is absolutely the best thing for the United States.
How devastating would it be for the United States, or how devastating would it be for Israel to attack Iran?
Yeah, that's one of the things that we're hyping so much, is that you can, if you want to, you can hate Iran. That's an individual choice. But when you're talking about taking military action, you have to ask the big question, and then what? You launch missiles, and then what? What is Iran going to do in response? What can Iran do to Israel? What can Iran do to even American interest or to our allied interest in the region? Can we take them out militarily, or can we only harm them? And if we only harm them, then what? What's the next level? Because now you've got an open-ended war that could be devastating to the global economy, that could be causing many of our troops who are in vulnerable positions, especially in Iraq and in Syria, that would be very vulnerable to Iranian ballistic missiles, as well as some of these other organizations in Iraq that are friendly to the Iranian regime. All kinds of things could happen if we push Iran into a corner. And by the way, the worst of those potentially would be compelling them to finally make the decision to have a nuclear weapon. No matter how many bombs you may drop, we may not be able to knock that out. So everything bad could happen if we go down this path, and I don't see anything good that could happen.
Are you worried about what happens at the Pentagon?
Of course I am. Again, because of that issue that Doug and I talked about on the show this afternoon, that the number 2 guy in the chain of command of the United States Armed Forces apparently was compelled to take action against his own interest, because these guys were so loyal to him. Then you have to wonder what is going on, and who's, if not pulling strings, who's putting pressure on that can actually cause the Secretary of Defense to have to blink on his own team. So I think that's the bigger question for me, is what's going on behind the scenes that we don't see. And maybe you're talking about some of it there.
Can I ask a follow-up to something that Natalie asked earlier about the mainstream media, and because of social media now getting out these messages? You mentioned someone like General Jack Keane. Now, when I worked at Fox News and I worked with Pete Hegseth, I mean, he was my co-host on a show together, for crying out loud. And they would put on these like warmongers all the time, like General Jack Keane, and, who wants to go to war with China. He wants to go to war with everybody. It seems like the mainstream media is now having to walk a really delicate line here. They're sort of having to sit on the fence, because here, like, Pete worked there and they have him on the show and they're interviewing him, but at the same time, then they're also putting on these warmongers and these analysts like General Jack Keane and these other warmongers pushing, John Bolton and these other nut jobs, trying to push us into a war with God knows who. So I think they're in a real pickle right now, because they got a guy that used to work there that they're trying to interview and still curry favor. It's like access journalism. They don't want to burn that bridge.
Right. They don't. And I think to your comment a second ago, that most of the American people aren't buying it, because they see that this just doesn't make sense, and what they're being told doesn't line up with what they see. And of course, I'm encouraged by that. We try to propel that same issue on our own show here by putting out the truth, and here's what's really going on, and things that make sense, and it's logical and rational. And anything we can do to keep going down that, which is why I applaud you guys for covering this issue the way you are. But I hope that the mainstream media is uncomfortable with this and has to not just walk a fine line, but get back on the right side of the line and cover things that actually are true and real, and if not expose who's trying to push pressure on the United States to take action antithetical to our interest. Let's just put forward people who are telling the truth and have them on Fox News more.
Well, there are new insider allegations that it was one of his deputies that was running the show and making these firing decisions, which is interesting because your point is well taken. He's in charge. How can he not thwart that if that's what he really wants? Now, again, he was Clayton's co-anchor. As a family, we find him to be a very sincere person. My take on it is that he was prepared for the media storm around his own personal life, but maybe was not prepared for the dark forces that might undermine him once he took the job, maybe because I don't know why, right? Because who would see this coming, because the pro-war faction is just so strong and deep-stated.
Well, and
there's such a word.
And he also was very pro-Israel. He was also very pro-Israel. Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm pro-Israel, but I'm also pro-truth. And just to be clear on that, and I actually went on Fox and several other networks when his name was first announced as being nominated for Secretary of Defense. And I said, listen, I think that, the charge that he wasn't qualified, he hadn't run a big business, he wasn't a general and all that stuff. I said, listen, the guys who have all these qualifications have been doing a terrible job in the past. Maybe we need a breath of fresh air. And if he can do the things that he said and, reorient the Pentagon, bring back the warrior ethos, hold people accountable, set
fresh air. I thought that was a DEI. I thought that was affirmative action. No, he's affirmative action. He's a DEI. He's put America in jeopardy. Pete Hegseth is a clown, and he's exposing himself before the world. Oh, now it's a breath of fresh air. If you're not qualified for your job, get the fuck out of here.
Set higher standards. I said, those are all fabulous things we really need. And so I said, let's give him a chance. But I said, I warned at the time, right at the beginning, he will run into some huge headwinds because the edifice that is the Pentagon, they love the status quo. They love these guys that are highly qualified, the former generals, because everything's comfort. They can control that. But now that somebody like Hegseth comes in, and I recommended that he needed to fire a bunch of generals at the beginning, because of these people who would be against him and would undermine him needed to be out of the way and hired by people who were qualified and capable, but also aligned with President Trump's vision. That only a couple of people got let go, and I don't think enough of them did, and that might have been a real problem.
I hope. I think you're right about that. The deep state is strong, and the dumping and the emptying of the swamp has not gone far enough, and that was certainly the mistake of President Trump's first term. He didn't drain the swamp at all. In fact, he added to it. So hopefully this time he's learned a bigger lesson. We'll see how the week plays out, though. Will Hegseth have a job by the end of the week? Maybe will these guys be reinstated by the end of the week? We'll see. Colonel Dan Davis, appreciate you joining us.
Excellent context. Thank you so much.
You bet.
Yeah,
thanks so much.
Really
Secretary of Defense to replace Pete Hegseth after his latest Signal chat drama. But is that what this is really about? For those of you who don't know Pete Hegseth beyond his name, let's start with a quick primer. Hegseth is a 44-year-old Army National Guard veteran who served tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, earning 2 Bronze Stars for his service. He's a Princeton grad, a conservative commentator, and was a familiar face on Fox News before President Donald Trump tapped him to lead the Department of Defense in January of 2025. His appointment raised eyebrows from the start, not because of his military credentials, but because he lacked the traditional resume of a Pentagon chief. No prior experience running a massive bureaucracy like the DoD, which oversees 1.3 million active duty troops and a nearly $900 billion budget. Critics called him a political pick, chosen for his loyalty to Trump and his alignment with the America First agenda. Supporters, on the other hand, praised his outsider status, arguing he'd shake up a bloated, woke Pentagon. Love him or hate him, Hegseth's been a lightning rod since day one. Now, let's get to the heart of the controversy that's threatening to end his tenure, the Signal chat drama. So if you're scratching your head wondering what Signal is, it's a secure encrypted messaging app, kind of like WhatsApp, but with a focus on privacy. It's popular among people who want to keep their conversations off the grid, including apparently top U.S. national security officials. So back in March of 2025, a bombshell story broke in the Atlantic magazine. Jeffrey Goldberg, the editor-in-chief, revealed that he'd been accidentally added to a Signal group chat called Houthi PC Small Group, created by National Security Advisor Mike Waltz. This chat included some of the biggest names in Trump's national security team: Hegseth, Vice President J.D. Vance, CIA Director John Ratcliffe, Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard, and others. The problem? Well, they were discussing highly sensitive plans for U.S. airstrikes against Houthi rebels in Yemen 2 hours before the bombs started falling on March 15th. So let's pause for a second to let that sink in. A journalist, someone who's not supposed to be anywhere near classified military plans, was privy to real-time discussions about a U.S. military operation. Now, according to Goldberg, Hegseth himself posted a team update at 11:44 a.m. that day, laying out precise details, targets, weapon systems, and the attack sequence. This wasn't just casual chatter. It was the kind of information that, if intercepted by an adversary like Iran, the Houthis' main backer, could have put American pilots at risk. Goldberg called it shockingly reckless, and he wasn't alone. Former Defense Secretary Leon Panetta told CNN it was a very serious mistake. Democratic lawmakers like Senator Schumer and Representative Pat Ryan demanded investigations, with some calling it a breach of national security. But wait, it gets worse. Just last week on April 20th, the New York Times dropped another bombshell. Hegseth was involved in a second signal chat where he shared similar details about the Yemen strikes. This one, called Defense Team Huddle, was created by Hegseth himself on his personal phone before his confirmation. It included 13 people, among them his wife, a former Fox News producer with no official Pentagon role, his brother, a Department of Homeland Security liaison to the Pentagon, and his personal lawyer. The chat contained flight schedules for FA-18 Hornet jets tasked with striking Houthi targets, information that experts say would almost certainly be classified before the operation. So why would Hegseth share this with his family and lawyer? It's unclear. His wife has been criticized before for attending sensitive meetings with foreign leaders, like a discussion with British defense officials about Ukraine. His brother and lawyer have Pentagon roles, but there's no obvious reason they'd need to know about impending airstrikes. The Pentagon's Inspector General is now investigating both chats, and Democrats are screaming for Hegseth's head. Senator Tammy Duckworth, an Iraq War veteran, said he must resign in disgrace. Senator Minority Leader Chuck Schumer posted on X, Pete Hegseth must be fired. Even some Republicans, like Congressman Dan Bacon, have expressed concerns about Hegseth's judgment. Hegseth and the White House have pushed back hard. Hegseth claims no classified information was shared, calling the stories fake news, driven by leakers and the Trump-hating media. The White House has echoed this, saying, no matter how many times the legacy media tries to resurrect the same non-story, they can't change the fact that no classified information was shared. President Trump himself has stood by Hegseth, saying on April 21st, Pete's doing a great job. Everybody's happy with him. Ask the Houthis how he's doing. But here's where things get murky. The White House denied a report that they're searching for a new defense secretary, with spokesman Caroline Leavitt calling it total fake.
This clown should be fired just for how miserably he's failed in the war against the Houthis. They've been embarrassed. The Houthi rebels stronger than ever. Still shut down the shipping in the Red Sea. You think that I'm lying? Try to go through there. Come on, this is ridiculous. He spent almost $1 billion of wasted our money. The Houthi rebels refused to surrender. And all of this is because these clowns decided to attack the Houthi rebels, who got the right to help to end genocide.
Fake news, yet the timing of these leaks and the intensity of the backlash raise questions. Why is Hegseth suddenly the target of such a coordinated media and political onslaught? To answer that, we need to look at a New York Times report from last week that's flown under the radar, a report that might reveal the real reason the knives are out for Pete Hegseth. According to the New York Times on April 14th, Hegseth was one of a few senior officials advising President Trump against authorizing a military strike on Iran. Yep, you heard that right. Hegseth, the supposed warmonger, was urging restraint. The context here is critical.
He is a warmonger.
Tensions with Iran have been escalating.
He had been talking to generals inside the U.S. military who told him the truth that they was going to get fucked up if they tried to go to war with Iran at this time. But Israel don't care about Americans getting fucked up. They want that war. He didn't do nothing because he want peace. He want to negotiate. No, because there was nothing to do except all-out war, which was going to be bad for America in the Middle East. We got to point that out. That's why he getting exposed, because Israel said, hell no, ain't no pumping the brakes. It's wartime. And y'all promised us war.
The Houthis, Iran's proxies in Yemen, have been attacking Red Sea shipping since late 2023, disrupting global trade. Iran's nuclear program is also a growing concern, with Trump's team engaging in high-stakes talks to curb it. If those talks fail, some fear the U.S. could be pushed toward military action to stop Iran from going nuclear. Hegseth, alongside others, reportedly argued that a strike on Iran would be a dangerous escalation, potentially dragging the U.S. into another broader Middle East war. But the plot thickens, because it's not just Hegseth in the crosshairs. His closest allies are being taken out too. And if you thought the signal chat drama was bad, here's where it gets even uglier. Last week, 3 of Hegseth's top aides, Dan Caldwell, Darren Selnick, and Colin Carroll, were fired, supposedly for leaking sensitive information. But hold on. These guys, known for their realist approach to foreign policy, say the accusations are baseless. John Olliott, a former Pentagon official, backed them up in Politico, calling the firings a sham and describing a department in total collapse. These aides were vocal against war with Iran, just like Hegseth. And guess what? Their ousting comes right after that New York Times report about Hegseth urging Trump to avoid striking Iran. Coincidence? I don't think so. Posts on X are buzzing, claiming neocons and the Israeli lobby pushed these firings to clear out anti-war voices and pave the way for a Pentagon chief who will back a war with Iran. And it's looking like a page out of the 2017 playbook when General Flynn was taken down by similar.
Oh, shame on Israel for getting what they paid for. This is what you get for being an Israeli flunky. When they own you, they can humiliate you and tell you who can and can't be in your government, what you can and can't do. This is, hey, you shouldn't have made a deal with the devil. These people made deals with the devil. Now they got to pay up. Now you promised war, so it got to be a war. I tell you, the war is coming because Israel not finna let this go. Are you crazy? Oh no, this them playing nice. Now you don't want to see them get ugly with the Trump administration.
Similar tactics. This isn't just about leaks. It's about controlling the Pentagon and America's foreign policy. Now, let's connect the dots. Hegseth's dovish stance on Iran puts him at odds with a powerful force, the Israeli lobby and its allies in Washington. Israel has long viewed Iran as its top existential threat, and its government, led by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, has pushed for aggressive U.S. action against Tehran. The American Israel Public Affairs Committee, AIPAC, and other pro-Israel groups wield significant influence in U.S. politics, often shaping policy through lobbying campaigns, campaign contributions, and media pressure. When Trump met with Netanyahu in February of 2025, reports surfaced that Trump assured the Pentagon would not intervene if Israel struck Iran, a signal of alignment with Israel's hawkish stance. Suddenly, Hegseth's role as a voice of caution makes him a problem. The signal chat leaks, first in March and now in April, conveniently amplify calls for his removal just as the Iran debate heats up. The media frenzy, led by outlets like the New York Times and the Atlantic, both of which have ties to establishment foreign policy circles. Add to that the firing of 4 senior America First Pentagon aides loyal to Hegseth, and this smells like an orchestrated hit job. So let's be clear. I'm not saying Hegseth is a saint, sharing sensitive military details on Signal, even if not technically classified.
They were not America First Pentagon officials that were fired. That was a lie. That was a scam to get in power. Then they start kissing Israel ass, swearing, playing allegiance to Israel. See, all that America First bullshit, they scammers. We was the only ones who was America First. They wasn't. They swore allegiance to Israel. Don't let none of these people fool you, even her. When it came time for the war, nigga, they backed out. They didn't want it. They didn't want it. That's just the truth. Israel is lunatics. They want it. They don't give a fuck about the U.S. getting destroyed. They're not Israel getting destroyed. They're gonna stay in Switzerland or something. They not from the Middle East. That's just serious business. Now they want to talk about the America First. Y'all want no America First? Like I said, this is what happens. This is what happens when you swear oath to Israel. They're gonna get what they paid for, and that's they pay for all of y'all asses. You belong to them.
Classified was a bonehead move. It's the kind of mistake that would get a junior officer court-martialed, as one defense official told CNN. But the disproportionate outrage, the bipartisan pile-on, and the White House's reported search for a replacement suggest something bigger at play. The Israeli lobby and its neoconservative allies want a defense secretary who will green light a war with Iran, not someone preaching restraint. Hegseth's America First skepticism of endless wars makes him a threat to that agenda. Think about it. The first Signal chat story broke in March, right after the Yemen strikes. It embarrassed Hegseth, but it didn't dislodge him. Now, a month later, a second chat surfaces with details that amplify the scandal. The sources? Anonymous people familiar with the matter, often disgruntled ex-employees, according to Hegseth's team. The Pentagon's leak investigation, which Hegseth himself has championed, conveniently targets his inner circle, weakening his position. And the media, from the New York Times to NPR, frames it as a national security crisis.
They're not gonna listen. The small hat's not gonna let Trump hide behind these little people neither. They're not dumb. Trump tried to play these people. That's just Trump trying to play Benjamin Netanyahu and the Zionists. This sucker absolutely. Oh man, this dude is a motherfucking fool, bro. He absolutely tried to bluff them too. All that tough talk. Trump just tried to bluff the whole fucking world, and you can't do that. You have to pay up. He ain't gonna be able to blame Pete Hegseth and say, oh, okay, Pete didn't want war, so we won't go to war. They're like, they will. Boy, please. We're doing this to Pete. Sooner or later, they're gonna say, well, what are you saying, Mr. Trump? Do you want to defend Israel? You see, Trump don't want this next step. They're gonna start destroying his ass, not his flunkies. See, Trump trying to be slick, act like, oh, it was my defense minister. Nah, it was you. You didn't want to go to war because your ass already knew you was gonna be defeated. You didn't want to be. You're trying to be a peace president. You can't be a defeated peace president. He hate losers. He didn't want to be a losing, defeated, peaceful president.
Ignoring Hegseth's role in averting a far bigger crisis with Iran. So where does this leave us? Hegseth is hanging on by a thread, backed by Trump, but facing a growing chorus of critics. The signal chat drama is real and it's sloppy, but it's being weaponized to serve a larger agenda. The Israeli lobby, frustrated by Trump's hesitation on Iran, sees Hegseth as a roadblock. Replacing him with a hawk like Mike Pompeo or Tom Cotton, names floated in D.C. circles, would pave the way for a U.S.-backed war with Iran, fulfilling Israel's strategic goals, but risking American lives and treasure. So for you, here's the real takeaway. Don't just swallow the headlines. When you see a scandal like this, ask who benefits. Hegseth's no angel, but the rush to crucify him reeks of a setup. The real fight isn't about signal chats. It's about whether America gets dragged into another Middle Eastern quagmire. Thanks for watching this clip from the full.
This food is a DI high, and this food is affirmative action pick. Man, we ain't not letting them get away with that, especially not nobody like him, disgusting punk. You DI hire, you affirmative action pick, was never qualified for that job. Man, please, boy, if that was a black dude, are you kidding me? You know what all them racist white people be saying right now? Boy, DI hire, affirmative action. He wasn't qualified for the job. He only got the job because he was black. Okay, why the hell did you get the job, buddy? You telling me you only got the job because you was white? Yes.
Hi, everybody. Today is Tuesday, April 22nd, 2025, and our friend, Professor Marandi, is back with us. Welcome back, Professor.
Thank you, Nima. Always a pleasure. Always an honor.
Last time we talked, it was the first round of negotiations between the United States and Iran. And right now we know that the second round of talks, indirect talks, were somehow positive. And what are we going to see, in your opinion? How does Iran feel about the negotiation, the talks between the two parties?
I really have no idea. It's literally impossible to guess. Trump has changed his mind on so many things, so many times, both local and global, that I don't even think he knows what his future plans are, or his chief of staff knows what the plan really is. Just today, we saw him say how he and the Israeli regime's prime minister are on the same page on everything. In other words, two genocidal monsters completely in coordination with one another. But then on another day, he'll say, my only issue is nuclear weapons, which if that's really his only issue, then the matter is easily resolved. On another day, he'll say something completely different. And it's not just Iran, as I said. It's the tariff war, it's Ukraine, it's internal U.S. politics. It's real chaos. And therefore, for me to be able to predict 2 days ahead, 2 days from now, I just think it's beyond my mental capability and comprehension. But what I would say is that, and I've been saying this before, that there are a lot of people who are opposed to the agreement, not just the neocons and the Zionist lobby, but you see this in the Democratic Party as well. You see Kerry's article, you see the New York Times speaking about how Iran has no air defenses. And I've been saying that I think that Republicans, many Republicans and and almost all Democrats are now opposed to the deal. And I think it's because they want Trump to fail. That because of their animosity towards Trump, but also, of course, there's the the Zionist lobby, as I said, and the neocons. And today we saw an interview. I listened to most of it, not all of it, between Tucker Carlson and Dan Caldwell or something like that. Anyway, and he was just kicked out of the Secretary of Defense out of the Pentagon. They accused him of leaking confidential and classified material to the media, and he was saying it's nonsense. And Tucker Carlson's belief was, and his belief seemed to be, that it was because he was opposed to any war against Iran that they did this to him. But during the interview, one of the things that he said was more or less what I've been saying for a while, and that is that the opposition to an agreement in the Democratic Party is enormous, and they just want it to fail, even though they were for the agreement before. Now they seem to want Trump to be aggressive and to make demands that are unrealistic. So there are many elements to the deal, and so if Trump does a deal that is reasonable, they'll say that, look, he's capitulated to the Iranians. And so what they want is for him to be so aggressive.
You got to understand, the Democrats and Republicans been backdooring each other over Iran for a long time. When President Jimmy Carter, that's how Jimmy Carter lost his presidency. He lost to Ronald Reagan. What happened? You ever heard of the Iran Contra scandal? When Iran seized the embassy, which the CIA was running spies out of the U.S. embassy in Iran, they had puppet governments over there, overthrew that government, seized the Americans in there. The Iranians was going to give those Americans back to the Carter government. They just wanted them out of their fucking country. They wanted to just get rid of them. Yeah, get the hell out. The Republicans did a backdoor channel with the Iranian government. This is all public information. Anybody can look this up. And told the Iranians, no, this is really crazy. They did this. Don't release the Americans. Keep the Americans in your custody. They want to make President Carter look bad and look weak and look soft on Iranian terror. Imagine that. And told Iranians, if you keep the Americans hostage, when Ronald Reagan win the election, we'll give you some guns and shit of that nature. Okay, so they kept the hostages. Carter lost because he was soft on Iran. Imagine if Carter would have got those Americans back, he would have beat Ronald Reagan, but the Republicans didn't want that. So the Iranians, Ronald Reagan won. So now the Iranians, okay, give us our weapons you promised us. Oh shit, we did promise them weapons. We don't want them going public with all this type of shit. So you get your Contra scandal. They're like, damn. Well, let's just sell coke in the black community, get a bunch of money selling coke. We also get destroy the black community. Then that coke money, we'll buy some illegal guns, ship those guns to the Contras in South America, and ship some guns to Iran. They all got caught up doing that bullshit. But they've been backdooring each other over Iran. So the Democrats is not above backdooring Trump right now over Iran. Probably telling Iran behind closed doors, don't make no deal with Trump. We get now, we'll give you a better deal, and we'll take sanctions off for you.
aggressive that an agreement becomes unachievable. That's I think something we have to keep in mind. Another thing that is important is that this whole narrative about Iran becoming weak. You hear it all the time, and in fact, in that part of the interview that I listened to, the gentleman Dan Caldwell or something like that, he was saying the same thing, and or sort of. But the fact is that this narrative doesn't make any sense. To say that Iran has grown weak, we've already gone over this. You see in Yemen, for example, the resistance is doing well. In Lebanon, it took a hit, but so did the Israeli regime. They're taking hits in Gaza and Lebanon, and their image has been destroyed, their economy. Why don't they say Israel has grown weaker? Or more importantly, the United States, with the trade war, with the war in Europe, it's grown weak. But the only thing that they can imagine is a weaker Iran. They don't say that the United States has grown weaker because it is fighting the world, basically, with its tariff war. And of course, China in particular. Doesn't say the United States, they don't say that the United States is growing weak because of the ongoing war in Ukraine. They don't say that Israel is growing weak because its economy is in tatters, because people are exhausted, because people are leaving the country, leaving Palestine, and as I said earlier, the regime is, and the whole Zionist project is despised across the world. Even now in the United States, the majority have a negative view. So why don't these people say, is the Israeli regime has become weak, the United States has become weak, Iran, which has much better relations today with the global South. Of course, Russia and China have grown much closer to Iran. China, after the trade war, has taken additional steps to move closer to Iran. But Iran's relationships with countries in the region, we saw the Saudi defense minister, the Khalid bin Salman, come visit Iran, give a message from the King Salman to Ayatollah Khamenei. We've seen this, all of these, but still Iran is the side that's grown weaker. This logic is, of course, it's flawed. But the point is that it's being repeated in the liberal media because they want to say that if Trump does a deal with Iran, it's going to be a bad deal because Iran has no protection, Iran is weak, all of Iran's allies have fallen apart, which is, again, not really the case. Syria over the last few years wasn't very close to Iran. And now that Syria has been destroyed, we see that it's becoming a complete mess. And it's not exactly a good situation either for Israel or for Turkey or for the United States or for, and Iran is no longer paying to subsidize the economy or to help the economy in Syria anymore. So it really doesn't make sense. And the only way you can define it or to comprehend it or to make sense of it is to say that this is a part of a broader project. Well, part of it is general propaganda. Whenever Israel attacks, they say it was successful. If Iran attacks, they'll say it's a failure. If Hezbollah attacks, they'll say it's a failure, and so on. But part of it is because they want to make a deal unachievable or to make it that much more difficult for Trump. So for those people who think that the Democratic Party is like they're more peace-loving, they're all the same. We saw Biden's genocide in Gaza, and Trump just continued it. So there's no difference.
Professor, do you believe that the communication between Russia and Iran and between Iran and China, is that going to help or somehow influence the United States, or maybe the negotiation, the process of negotiation, how Russia and China can help these sort of negotiation, these sort of talks between Iran and the United States, in your opinion?
Well, regardless of what is being discussed between the Iranians and the Russians and the Chinese, and the Iranian foreign minister, I think right now is in China. The fact is that after the Ukrainian war, Russia's relations with Iran have improved dramatically, and therefore cooperation, both military and civilian, has increased dramatically. The missing link to a degree was always China, because China has always been a very cautious country, very cautious. And the Chinese, on more than one occasion, I think on multiple occasions over the years, my Chinese friends, whenever we discuss the evolving global situation, not now, but I mean like 5 years ago, before Corona, 10 years ago, they'd always say that China is like a super tanker. Change is very slow. And China is always cautious, has always been cautious about the United States. Well, after what Trump has done, both during his previous term in office, but also now, and what the Biden regime did as well, that has made the super tanker move or shift direction more rapidly. But after the trade war, we see a dramatic change. So China is no longer going to be cautious about its relationship with Iran, and we already see that, by the way, in the exchanges and some of the things that have been happening over the past few weeks, even before the trade war began. I think it was clear to the Chinese that something was happening. So we see that evolving. So in the past, before Russia was sanctioned, they were cautious about working with Iran because they didn't want to get sanctioned. The Chinese, they were always cautious about Iran until just weeks ago, because they were always, well, as I said, it's been changing over the last few months, but especially since weeks ago, they're changing. They're no longer afraid of how the Americans will view things, or whether the Americans will punish them, because the Americans are doing whatever they can to harm the Chinese economy. And that's why we see that Iranian oil is being purchased by China at such high levels, despite the fact that the Americans are always increasing sanctions. So Iran's hand is strengthened, but also the decline of the United States. You see how that's being felt across the region. Why would Khalid bin Salman come to Iran? Because the Saudis feel vulnerable. That's at least a part of it. That's a huge part of it. I mean, there may be other reasons the Saudis want to have a better relationship. They want to do business. They want to solve issues in Lebanon and Syria. The Saudis have big problems with what's going on in Syria. They're not happy with Turkey. They're, of course, they're worried about the Israeli regime. Countries across the region are increasingly worried about the Israeli regime. Those countries that until now have been quiet, now they feel more vulnerable. But part of it is that the Saudis are fearful. Why? If there is war, they know that the Persian Gulf will be a minefield. There will no longer be any oil or gas exports from the region. But 10 years ago, when the United States was constantly in conflict with Iran, the Saudis wanted the United States to attack. You know, we saw from WikiLeaks documents that they were saying, cut off the head of the snake, meaning Iran. What has changed? Iran has grown more powerful. The United States has shown that it is not the hyperpower that it seemed to be, at least in the past. It is on the decline. Iran is on the rise. The global south is on the rise. So even in the region, we see a shifting of attitudes. So Iran's relationship, both with global powers, is evolving, with China, with Russia, with India, with other countries, but also regionally. We see under these circumstances, the Saudi king send his own son to Iran, and the brother of the crown prince, of course. So I think that this contributes a great deal to Iran's strength, its sense of strength. If the Americans are smart, they would take all of this into consideration. But there is a certain arrogance about the United States that simply won't go away. US exceptionalism, the sense of superiority, being above and beyond the rest of us, sort of very much like Zionism. That, I think, impedes the United States from analyzing what's going on across the world realistically. And I think the reason why they failed in the trade war and the reason why they failed in Ukraine is for the same reason. Their arrogance pushes them in a direction which is illogical, it's irrational, and any sane person would be making calculations would say that's not the way to go. But they feel that if they can do it, unlike they're different from all others, and those miscalculations have been bringing down the United States further and further over the decades. And now I think we're at a tipping point.
I think under the Trump administration, we are witnessing some sort of shift from Europe to Asia. But when you look at the way that the Israeli lobby in the United States is they did everything, Professor Marandi. We had the head of Mossad together with Dermer, and they were talking as Witkoff was in Europe to talk with Iranians. He was there, they were there, and to influence Witkoff. But on the other hand, you see, as you've mentioned, the defense minister of Saudi Arabia going to Iran. We have the Sultan of Oman in Russia. And Russia is just trying to get closer to be more connected with the Arab states. They're talking, the Vladimir Putin talk about it. But when the United States under the Trump administration is witnessing what's going on in the Middle East, and the way that the Israelis are forcing them in this endless conflict war in the Middle East, do you think that Donald Trump and his administration would be able to manage the situation? Do you see the capability in the administration? Do we have any sort of evidence to talk about it?
No, the United States is losing control. And I have no doubt that the Saudi king's son's trip to Iran is something that the Americans are not happy about. And the American campaign against Yemen is not going well at all. I spoke to people very much familiar with what's going on in Yemen and today, and they were saying that it's a complete failure. And that's why they're going after civilian infrastructure. That's why they're murdering and burning alive dock workers. That's why they're bombing hospitals. That's why they're bombing markets and slaughtering people. They're using the same Israeli method. When the Israelis fail against the resistance, they go after ordinary people. They did that in Lebanon. They failed to make any headway. They just simply bombed people's apartments, slaughtered families day and night. And the Western media would say these are Hezbollah strongholds or Hezbollah targets to justify the genocidal attacks. The same is true at a much larger scale in Gaza, how they tried to justify everything that they did. But the point was that the Israelis, they failed against the resistance against Hamas and Islamic Jihad, and they just slaughter people day and night, as they are doing as we speak. And so the Americans did the same in Yemen. So it is these atrocities which only make things worse for the United States. These are being carried out because the United States feels that it's failed. It has been unable to destroy any of the underground infrastructures created by Ansarullah. They are constantly firing missiles and drones. There is no traffic going through the Red Sea, thanks to the United States, by the way. There was traffic going through. Ansarullah said only, and the Yemeni armed forces, that they will only block ships linked to the Israeli regime because of the genocide. They also said that if the genocide stops, I know your audience, for the most part, knows this, but just as a reminder, they said if the genocide stops, they'll stop, and they already did during the ceasefire once. But now, because of what the Americans did, the whole Red Sea is blocked. No insurance company is going to pay for their ships to go through the Red Sea under such circumstances. So the Americans have failed. They've showed that they don't control the military situation. They don't control the political situation. And I explained earlier Iran's growing relationship with China as a result of the tariff war. And they don't control the narrative. They simply don't control the narrative. The world despises the United States. The world hates the West. They hate them for carrying out genocide. They hate them for carrying out a Holocaust in Palestine and for not stopping, and for constantly helping the Israeli regime to keep on slaughtering. And then Trump goes and puts up a post saying, Netanyahu and I are on the same page. What image does that create for Trump? It destroys his credibility even more. So the Americans don't control the narrative. They don't control the military situation. They don't control the economic situation. They're not winning the tariff war, and that includes this region. And they're not controlling the political relationships, as we saw through the Saudi defense minister bringing a message from the Saudi king to Iran. Things have changed. They're changing rapidly. I've always said over the years that we live in a world where it's impossible to keep up. The last few months has just been the pace has been increasing, and I think the last few weeks it's just want to sit down and just go to sleep, and it's just impossible now to keep up. You go to sleep and you wake up in the morning and you take a look at the news and you see that there's a whole new situation to deal with, and the models that you were constructing in your mind just a few hours ago, they've all been broken down, they've all been torn apart, and you have to redraw the map, create a new model, and that's going to probably be knocked out by the subsequent day.
You've mentioned the situation with Yemen. I don't believe that the United States, Donald Trump, would be able to continue, because they're just losing the war, and they're just losing a lot of weapons in the fight with Yemen. But you've mentioned something important about the situation in Lebanon, with the new attitude of the Saudi Arabia and this new connection between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Do you think the concern on the part of Saudi Arabia, what are they concerned of, in your opinion, in terms of Lebanon?
We'll have to see. But you do have this tweet in Persian by so-called fans of Mohammed bin Salman, but it's a blue tick, which I'm not quite sure what that means. I mean, one day I woke up in the morning and I saw I had a blue tick on my Twitter account. So but anyway, it has a blue tick, and it was a tweet in Persian saying Saudi Arabia, like Mohammed bin Salman is saying, and apparently this is a quote from him from earlier. But he said Saudi Arabia is against any U.S. Israeli attack on Iran and the attacks on Lebanon and Gaza. And it was a few days ago. I don't remember exactly what.
I think, if I'm not mistaken, he mentioned Yemen as well.
I'm not sure. Maybe. I mean, it may be in front of you. You could see. But the point is that this was, of course, in Persian. So it was for a Persian audience. It wasn't in Arabic or English. But still, the very fact, and you can have your own theory as to why the Minister of Defense was sent to Iran. But the point is that Lebanon was mentioned, Gaza was mentioned, the Israeli regime was mentioned in the tweet. And even though it's not a formal account, but still there's something in that. So I think the Saudis, for whatever reason, and there are different ways to see this, and you can look at different ways simultaneously. You can look at it from different perspectives simultaneously too. But for whatever reason, the Saudis want to come to some sort of accommodation with Iran. And that was clear from the language used by the defense minister while he was in Tehran. And so there is greater possibility, regardless of the reason behind the scenes for the trip to take place. The possibilities are broad. There are new possibilities for an improved relationship and the easing of tensions across the region. One small footnote that I think may be important for some is that he was supposed to come earlier, but apparently he became ill and the trip was delayed for a few days. Because of the negotiations and all that, some that may have an impact on how people interpret it. But I think that it has some significance.
Here is what he said, Professor Morandi. We call on the international community to immediately halt Israeli attacks on our brothers in Palestine and Lebanon, and to compel Israel to respect the sovereignty of the brotherly Islamic Republic of Iran and not to attack its territory. Here is what you mentioned, and there is no mention of Yemen.
Yeah. But remember this. I mean, your audience remember that this is in Persian. You read the translation, and this is not his official account, but this is the account that's attributed to his support, his fans, and their 1.1 million followers. So I consider that to have some significance, and I consider the statements made by the defense minister in Tehran to have significance, and that is why I think that it could have implications for Syria, greater cooperation between Iran and Saudi Arabia and Syria, greater cooperation in Lebanon with regards to the Israeli regime. Of course, greater cooperation can mean many things. It could be something insignificant, it could be something with limited significance, and it could be something important. It could be more significant in one area and less significant in another. But I think in general that we are seeing a shift. And again, I go back to what I was saying a while back. If you look at WikiLeaks, in the past, the Saudis were hoping that the Americans would attack Iran. They were pushing the Americans to attack Iran. Things have changed.
And the other case was in Syria. You mentioned they're not happy. Saudi Arabia is not happy with the case of Syria. And from what everyone remembers, that Saudi Arabia was somehow helping or sponsoring Daesh and Al Qaeda, ISIS. Right now, they're not happy with the case of Syria. What's with the case of Syria that making them not happy about that?
Well, first and foremost, it was Qatar and Erdogan more than anyone else at the beginning. Of course, with the Americans and with the Israelis, they were all on board. The Saudis gradually came on board. But yes, these regional countries are all, they were all involved in the American regime change operation. And they promoted sectarianism. We saw that sectarianism not just in the region, but in the United States and Europe. They created immense hatred for Iran and for minorities and for Alawites and for Druze and Christians and Shias and even Kurds. The Kurds are mostly Sunni. Among much of the Muslim population across Europe, through their mosques, through their huge number of TV channels that they had back then. Of course, now it's more online, but a decade ago, satellite TV was much more important than today. And this was being funded by all these countries, these sectarian channels. And so a lot of people fell into the trap through this blind sectarianism that was promoted by these regimes, and racial hatred, and also the narrative produced by the West, which complemented that in demonizing Iran and creating hatred towards Iran and the resistance. So a lot of people fell into the trap, ordinary people, but now everyone sees what's happened to Syria. Everyone sees what these so-called revolutionaries have done. They've ceded key parts of the country to the Israeli regime without any resistance. They're communicating with the Israeli regime, hopefully in the hope that they'll be able to establish a relationship with the regime. And of course, this was always to be expected. This dirty war was being carried out from Istanbul and Amman in Jordan. Istanbul has, I mean, Ankara, the operational center was in Istanbul, but Ankara, Erdogan, he has always had an excellent relationship with the Israeli regime. He's a part of NATO. Even now, Turkish Airways goes to, even as Ansarullah warned airlines not to go to Israel, Turkish Airways goes to Palestine on a regular basis. You go to Istanbul airport, you'll see these Zionists in the airport coming for vacation or passing through to go somewhere else. But in any case, so obviously this dirty war that the United States led and its allies and client regimes in the neighborhood were fine, they've destroyed Syria. And now Saudi Arabia is deeply concerned because the Israelis are expanding and many Zionists have ambitions that go beyond the West Bank and beyond parts of Syria, and that includes territory that belongs to Saudi Arabia. And of course, the expulsion of Palestinians from the West Bank. All of this is beginning to create fear. In Egypt, as you know, they brought troops close to the border with Gaza because they're afraid that the Israelis would try to expel the Palestinians. There is growing fear about the Israeli regime. So Saudi Arabia is more fearful of the Israeli regime. That benefits Iran and Saudi relations. It is not happy about what's going on in Syria, which makes it more inclined to cooperate with Iran, something that Iran sees as positive. And any positive language about Lebanon or Gaza or Palestine is a plus.
We had a report, we had an article in Reuters reporting that Israel is considering an attack on Iran in the coming month. But do you believe that without the United States and without the participation or providing intelligence and all of that to Israel, are they capable of doing this? Or is that going to benefit the United States in the talks? How can we understand that?
Well, we can look at it from two different perspectives. First of all, no, the Israelis can't carry out an attack on Iran without U.S. support. Even assassinations that they carry out in Iran and that they've carried out in Iran in the past, they've all been done with Western support. They use U.S. embassies, and they've always used U.S. embassies in neighboring countries and Western embassies, Muslim embassies in some cases, which I don't want to go into further. But they're on their own. They don't have any real capabilities. They're completely reliant for everything. When they attacked Iran, it was the Americans that were doing the heavy lifting. When Iran struck the Israelis twice, the Americans were doing the heavy lifting. It wasn't the Israeli regime. And of course, they were using radar bases in Turkey, in Qatar, in Bahrain, and in the Emirates, and perhaps elsewhere, in order to monitor Iranian drones and missiles, and to and help guide the Israeli planes that were attacking Iran. The Americans were, the American fuel tankers. Without the Americans, the Israelis can't do much. And even with the Americans, we saw that they really couldn't do all that much. But there are two ways of looking at it. There are multiple ways of looking. But one is that Netanyahu wants to prevent a deal, and he'll try anything. But the question is that if the Americans cooperate, if Americans don't cooperate with him, he will get nowhere. If the Americans cooperate with him, then that changes the equation between the United States and Iran. It says a lot about what Trump is up to. If he, the threat of attacks can be interpreted in two ways. One is, again, the attempt to wreck the agreement, but another is this, mad dog theory. And this is something that we've seen in the past. And of course, Israel is a mad dog. They're carrying out the Holocaust. So using this, the mad dog, it could be beneficial for the Americans. They may think that it could be beneficial for them at the negotiating table. And you can interpret Trump's post today about him and Netanyahu being, united on all fronts, as disturbing as it is and disgusting as it is. You can interpret it both ways. One is it could be that he's trying to put pressure on Iran to accept something, or that he is seriously contemplating or thinking about supporting Netanyahu in some sort of strike against the country. It's Trump. You can read it in so many different ways, and ultimately it could be something different. But the fact is, Nima, that no matter how they look at it, they can say the axis of resistance in Iran has grown weaker. In my opinion, I have no doubt that over the past, 19 months now, comparatively speaking, Iran is stronger, and the United States and Israel are weaker for a host of reasons. We've gone over this. They failed to gain territory in Lebanon. They failed to take Gaza. Their image is destroyed. Their economy, all of that true, but also the costs of war in Ukraine. But even more important than that is the global trade war. This for Iran is, it's a gift from heaven, because the world has turned against the United States, not just because of its cruelty in Gaza, but because it's now waging war of sorts against everyone. So the way I see it is that the United States today is isolated for a host of reasons, morally, economically, and so on, militarily. And Iran is popular. People see Iran as backing the Yemen, backing Gaza, backing Hezbollah and Lebanon and so on. And also Iran is reasonable. It's more than willing to do a fair deal. And the world has tilted away from the United States, China, Russia, and everyone else. Iran's military is very much intact. It's spending a lot of money, by the way, over the past few months to strengthen its air defenses. It now has real experience from the Israelis. They've shown their hand. So the Iranians are building up their air defenses, and they are working on their missile and drone capabilities. So why in the world would they? And another important point: Trump unites people against himself. If you compare Iran today with Iran during the Obama period, Obama was able to divide Iranian society to a degree through his hypocrisy, through his soft power, the fact that he was half African, he was an African American, his mother being white, but his father being black. That gave him a certain soft power capability among Iranians. He wasn't this, traditional imperialist. So, but Trump doesn't do that. He's the exact opposite. In Iran, people say this guy's crazy. Look at what he's doing with the trade war. Look at what he's doing in Ukraine. Look at what he's doing in Gaza. He's despised. So it's much easier for the Iranian state, for the government, for the armed forces to, point out that the problem lies in Washington and not in Tehran. And that keeps people more united. But more than just ordinary Iranians, it unites people across the world. It makes Iran's case much more easy for people to understand because they see Trump on the other side. So when Trump is standing against Iran, especially now after the trade war, people are saying, yeah, he's crazy. They sympathize with Iran more. This has enormous consequences. And when you put all of these together, I say with great confidence that Iran is stronger, comparatively speaking, now, and the Americans are weaker, comparatively speaking, and the Israeli regime is much, much, much weaker.
And you mentioned the axis of resistance. Whenever we talk about the conflict in Gaza, everybody's talking about the assassinations, how Israel was capable of doing that, but nobody's talking about the situation in Israel. Many people who, at least those people who are willing to follow the media in Israel, they can capture what's going on.
The Hebrew media. People should read the translation of the Hebrew media. People like Alistair Crook, by the way, he does that regularly, and I don't see it. I don't read. I don't have the time, because I'm not an expert on this sort of thing. I teach literature and Orientalism at the University of Tehran. So these are all experts, and I'm the amateur who's getting involved in this sort of thing. But I think in his Substack, he deals with this regularly in the Hebrew media, which is completely different from the English language media from Palestine, occupied Palestine. It shows that the divide is enormous. Many people are talking about the possibility of a civil war. According to some polls, most Zionists believe there will be a civil war, between the liberals, genocidal liberals, and the religious Zionists, who are also just as genocidal. The divide is enormous, and former prime ministers are weighing in, speaking about civil war and conflict and bloodshed. The situation inside Palestine is extraordinary, and Netanyahu is for whatever reason, he is the figure that holds things together for now, and he's ill, and he's of course we don't know how ill he is. People speculate, but his position is he's vulnerable. He has many legal problems. The reason why he's carrying out all these escalations is just to remain in power and to keep control. And that's why I believe that the Israeli regime today is so much weaker than it was in the past, because he's not working in the interest of the Israeli regime. He's slaughtering people across the world aboard, but he's weakening the regime. The foundations of the regime are crumbling, but he's doing it for his own sake. So the divide is huge. He is very vulnerable. He is also ill. He's following his own selfish interests. Things are not good for the regime. As I've said many times before, I don't believe Israel will last. I think we are in the final stages of Zionism in Palestine. That doesn't mean it will end 6 months from now, or a year from now, or 2 years from now, but it's not going to last that much longer.
Just to wrap up this session, Professor Marandi, with the current situation of the talks between Iran and the United States, how long does it take for Iranian part to understand if the United States is serious about negotiations?
I really don't know, Nima. I think a lot of people.
What are the main, in your opinion, what are the main factors to be considered as if to understand if they're serious about negotiations?
First of all, before I answer that question directly, the technical talks that were supposed to be held on Wednesday have been postponed till Saturday, at the same time when Dr. Araghchi, the Iranian foreign minister, and Trump's envoy Witkoff will be negotiating. So the technical teams will and the negotiators, the chief negotiators, will be engaging through simultaneously. So since there will be technical negotiations, I think some things will probably become clear on Saturday, whether the Americans are serious or not. And what are the signs that the Americans are serious? That they stop talking about Iran's missile program and drone program and Iran's alliances with Hezbollah for Iran, Hamas for Iran. These are Iran's brothers. Ansarullah, these are Iran's brothers. Iran is never going to relinquish these groups. Never. It's impossible. As we speak, they're helping them. It's not going to happen. And so if he puts aside these and the reason why Iran supports them is because from the very beginning of the revolution, one of the principles was the end of apartheid and ethnic cleansing in Palestine. This is not about, a couple of days ago, I don't want to mention names, someone told me that a friend of mine spoke on a program of another friend of mine, both people who you know of at least, and said that Iran has built these groups in Hamas, meaning Hamas, Islamic Jihad, Ansarullah, Hezbollah, for its own protection. No, that's not the case. It was from the very beginning. Iran supported Hezbollah to help liberate Lebanon. Iran supported Hamas and Islamic Jihad because they're freedom fighters. In Europe, they had freedom fighters against the Nazis. These were freedom fighters against our Nazis. And the same is true with Ansarullah. This was to help the people of Palestine. If Iran wanted to have good relations with the United States, all they had to do was give up all these groups. It would have been the problem that the United States has with Iran has nothing to do with the nuclear program. It has nothing to do with human rights. It has everything to do with Palestine. Otherwise, the United States doesn't sanction Turkey. It doesn't sanction Egypt. It doesn't sanction the Emirates. It doesn't sanction Jordan. Why? Because they know what they do is just empty talk. They know some don't even do it for show anymore, but the rest are just doing it for show. But in the case of Iran pays a price because it's a principle. But in the West, they like to, they've always tried to imagine Iran or create an image of Iran that Iran has no. In fact, Iran is morally superior to the West. And I'm speaking about Iran today. I'm not talking about Iran 100 years ago, 200 years ago. But Iran today, they have the moral high ground. They and Yemen and Hezbollah and all those who are making sacrifices for the people of Palestine. The Palestinians, of course, are heroic. Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and ordinary people. But they're defending themselves. They're defending their own rights. But Hezbollah, Iran, Ansarullah, and the others, they are making sacrifices for another people. Something that they could just not do. They don't have to do it. They can sell them out. But they won't do that. So if Trump recognizes that, look, this is not going to work. Forget this military defense capabilities. Forget, Iran's alliances. Stick to the nuclear program, but forget about mothballing the nuclear program. Recognize Iran's rights and develop a mechanism where Iran, you can be assured that Iran is not developing a nuclear weapon. That's fine for Iran. We've already been doing that. We don't have intention to develop nuclear weapons. Iran has already explained under what circumstances what will happen. And if there's no necessity for a nuclear weapon, why in the world would Iran want one? Nuclear weapons are not a good thing. If you have them, then others want them too. And you have all these unstable family regimes all over the region. So again, it all depends on Trump. If Trump is reasonable, if he respects Iran's rights and sovereignty, we'll have a deal. If not, then the standoff will take another. it will manifest itself in a different way. But ultimately, in any military conflict with Iran, the United States will lose. And I think when people like, people like those who work in the Pentagon, they look at the reality on the ground, and when they look at the history of these war games that they carry out, and they look objectively, they know that they will lose. And that's why Tucker Carlson did that tweet that the United States will lose and that it will lose thousands of men, because he obviously, as a very well-informed journalist, is speaking to people in the know, and they're saying that no, we won't win. Iran is not Iraq. Iran is not even Vietnam. And the United States, after these endless wars, and after the economic crisis in 2008 and 9, and after Ukraine, and now after the trade war, it is in no position to fight a war with Iran and win.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Professor Marandi. Great pleasure.
Thank you very much, Fabian. That's very kind of you.
All the white papers, the analysis coming out of the meeting and so forth. And I decided to do a video for you. The reason being because there is a lot of information out there that is kind of, I won't say misinformation. It just, they are not putting things in a proper context. And this is the reason why I wanted to, like I always say, my responsibility, not only to provide you an objective assessment, my own analysis, but also to protect the community from, so you can listen to whatever you want, read whatever you want, just be aware of what you are consuming. And this is what I'm going to be talking to you about. So it's going to be a lengthy one. So get yourself a cup of tea, cup of coffee, popcorn, whatever you do, and let's enjoy this one here. So, well, first, let me say hi quickly to our wonderful community. As always, Li Yang, good to see you. Truth Seeker, Tom Saya Wires, Matt Becky, as always. Hanging G, as always, and thank you for your comments, Hanging G. Li Yang, good to see you. YT, as always. Willie Holman, Thunderbolt, good to see you. Thunderbolt Designs. Alistalokin, good to see you. Famida, here you are. Rose, good to see you. Timeline Dunkley, Francis Tango, Celu A. There is this one right here. That's all it says right there. Hey, good to see you. Laval, good to see you. And Ping Yu, good to see you here. Some. All right, guys, let me get it because I got a lot to cover. So I want to start with some housekeeping stuff. I hope you guys enjoyed both my conversations with Einar Tengen, of course, a dear friend of mine, and Dr. Warwick Pao, also a dear friend. Also hope you enjoyed the conversation. Now, speaking of this too, I am going to be coordinating with them down the road, and I'm going to be having them on the channel on a monthly basis. Would you guys like to have that? You know, those are not your average people, intellectually speaking. So this is something you learn from. So I'm going to coordinate with them and see what their schedule looks like, and we'll go from there. And speaking of a monthly conversation, be on the lookout for my upcoming conversation with Carl Za. Of course, once a month we do this. And as to Garland and Brian, I am reaching out to, I already reached out to Garland. We're waiting to hear from Brian. Because I promised to host the next roundtable talks. So we're waiting to hear from Brian. And once that happens, I will do that. So now I want to quickly share with you the survey you guys took part of regarding, that was a Hanging G's question, believe it or not. So, and one of the questions was, would you, one of the questions, how many years does it take America to repair the Baltimore Bridge? Now, the Baltimore Bridge, to those who don't know, I used to live in Pennsylvania, so Baltimore was closer to me. I used to go there on the weekends, so I'm very familiar with the bridge. And so the question was, the first question was, or the question rather, will it take 5 years, 10 years, 30 years? And I put another option there as I don't know. So 36% of you put it at 30 years. That's how long it takes to fix. 29% of you said 10, and 15% said 5. So, but here is the thing I'm going to share with you. Did you guys know the state of Texas, where I live, we just received the report cards for 2025. You know what was our grade? C, regarding the infrastructure. And this specifically has to do with two things: the transit and the water decline, the quality that is. So the American Society of Civil Engineers found a slight improvements in aviation and roads to a degree, but a decline in drinking water, yeah, in America. You believe that? Energy and transit, among other categories. So I was very surprised to see that, and I wanted just to tie it to what Hanging G shared with us now. Now, next thing I want to share with you, and this is literally bothered me because of our community. I'm going to share on the screen. Take a look, guys, here. Here is what this individual wrote about our community. And I guess I won't have it. He said, and I quote, he or she, I don't know, and I quote, "Your audience seems to be reactionary and ignorant." Of course, the person is welcome to our demonstrations by the organizations and so forth, calling for the halt, because Maersk has been involved in transporting parts of the F-35 aircraft components to Israel and any other military material used in the war in Gaza. So, and of course, in response, Maersk's line was transporting military shipments to Israel. So the company denied and denied to Al Jazeera, believe it or not. So that is described it as allegations. What do you guys think? So Maersk is not involved just in the commodities, transporting of commodities. Second one is, this one has to do with the China Southern CZ. And this is a plane from China. I think I flew on this one from Shanghai to Guangzhou. I bet you, because it was with the China Southern Airlines. So I remember this one. So here's the thing: 10 Boeing 787 aircraft. So these planes handle critical network routes. This is like for the Chinese, and now selling them as originally intended will have necessitated funding brand new aircrafts. Those are the one that Chinese now developing on their own. So what you're looking at, it's the Chinese now. This is why they want to head and dump the Boeing stuff. So just I want you to be aware of that. And the last thing I'll share with you is that on April 18, which was over the weekend on Friday, the Houthis downed another, sorry for this one right here, down another MQ-9, and I give credit to Anadolu Agency for this picture right here, guys. Yeah, so the Houthis have shut down another one. This is the 5th. So since the US began its military campaign in March 15. So, and of course now the total reach about 20. And those planes, those drones are very, very sort of advanced, and yet the Houthis were able to down them. Makes you just wonder, do they have something special that we are not aware of? So anyway, let's get into our topic here. And this one, I'm going to start with a picture here for the Houthis. I give it to Anadolu Agency. This is the talks between Iran and this is Italian delegation, not the Americans. Do not get confused, guys. Iranians decided that the talks will be indirect. And I'm going to get into the analysis why the US wants to push the talks to move from Muscat, which is the capital of Oman, into a European city. The Americans are flip-flopping here. We all know what it means. So Ali Khamenei is saying, no, 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 no. We're going to keep the talks indirect till further notice. And this is why, now, the logical question that comes after this we need to ask is where these talks are headed. There is optimism and there is pessimism. So, and I let you reach your own towards the end once I give you my own, or share with you rather, my own analysis based on the facts. And I'm going to be sharing also some excerpts with you from my book because it pertains to what's going on. Then you reach your own conclusion for that. However, for me personally, I started with one specific question. Is a war coming to Iran? Given where the talks are headed, there is no. Media is saying, oh, the talks are constructive and all that. I don't buy that personally. The other argument to this for my question, whether is a war coming to Iran, because it is only within a week Iran will have the capability of developing a nuclear weapon. And this is based on even Mr. Trump himself. That is why he's arguing for an agreement with Iran, not a war with Iran. I bet you Mr. Trump understands the ramification of a war with Iran. First of all, we won't be able to defeat Iran. I'll tell you this straightforward. Despite the aircrafts and all, ain't gonna cut it. Because what Iran has in store for this. Second thing is that Mr. Trump is realizing possibility make more sense to cut a deal than to get involved in a war. And the reason also, for me personally, why he's leaning more towards this is because this all came aimed at the estimates that Tehran could produce enough amount of enriched uranium needed to build a bomb in less than 1 week. I still believe Iran's mistake is that they didn't move forward with all this from the get-go, because they left themselves vulnerable. And I always give the case of North Korea.
That's a fact.
Dare the United States to threaten North Korea.
They don't want that Kim smoke.
And this is where I'm going to be starting to think in terms, is Iran in a better position? Is Iran in a stronger position to negotiate now the nuclear agreement? So it's now the second round just took place in Italy, as you know, in Rome on Saturday. There is an upcoming one. I think they're going to now move into the technical aspects of it. So, but you need to understand what took place behind the scenes prior to that particular meeting, and I'll get into all this as I move forward into this. So now you think about the, if we are to think about the technical talks, because that's what's going to have to be next. So both parties, the Americans and the Iranians, will have to allocate technical individuals, because this is not for diplomacy. This has nothing to do. It has to do with the technical aspects. So, and these talks might end up taking place back in Oman. I know I read one article and they misspelled the word Oman by spelling it with an A, M-M-A-N, which is Amman is the capital of Jordan. This has nothing to do with that. And this is where you will think that for Iran, it's going to be specifically ensuring that the talks are limited to the nuclear program, no more, no less. There is another aspect which has to do with the lifting of sanctions. So, and the problem the US has with this is that the US is concerned with other stuff, and the other stuff meaning that the regional influence of Iran, the missile capabilities, you know, and the halting of all nuclear activities, including for civilian purposes, which is, in my opinion, is a red line for Iran. And second, this is not a concern of the United States, it's a concern of Israel. So we are the bidding for Israel, because that's what it's all about. What's at the heart of it? What's at the heart of it is we wanted only one entity in West Asia or Middle East to possess nuclear weapon. Can anybody tell me which country is that? Let me see in the chat box. And once again, guys, just to engage you in the conversation, no more, no less. Let me see what your answer is. Sorry, right here. Let me. You got it first. You know, all the way through. You got it. It's Israel. YT, you got it. You guys got it. Francis Tango, you got it. And that's exactly the point for why all of a sudden we are shifting the goalposts to a different. It's like, hold on a second. You can't change horses in the middle of the race. And that's, again, falls back to my original point way back. And I remember mentioning this. Iran will not trust the Americans. American government, that is, not the people. People are separate from all. So, and this is why you have two red lines, one for each, one for Iran and one for the United States. So for Iran, as I mentioned earlier, to them, the conversation will only be limited to two main points. One of them is the nuclear program, and the other one is the lifting of sanctions. That's about it. So for the United States to be talking about wants to include Iran's missile capabilities, the halting of all its nuclear activities, no, that's a red line for Iran. For the United States, the red line is they wanted to prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear bomb. Of course, Iran denies any intentions of acquiring a nuclear bomb. Maybe that's the mistake of Iran, in my opinion, because if Iran should have come forward, and again, I am leaning more towards saying Iran has the wild card, it's just not playing it right now. For whatever reason, this is how I'm reading it. But on the other hand, if they would have come forward and said, we have developed the bomb, and should you dare to threaten us, whatever, you will see a reversal in how we will be dealing with Iran. The same argument I made about North Korea, same arguments about Pakistan, or even India for that matter. So to the US, that is the red line, because now we seems to be moving in a different direction altogether. So, and that's how I see it moving forward. By the way, guys, if you're liking this video, don't just be a viewer or a watcher here. So go ahead and hit the like and subscribe button. I would greatly appreciate it. And also don't forget to hit the notification button. So this way, just tap the bell. Tap the bell. So this way you will be notified every time I upload a new video or I'll do a live stream. So, and this way you will be supporting the channel that stands for the truth, and you know that. So the choice is yours, and I'm very, very grateful to you for that. So it is. I'm gonna put the link for those who might be here for the first time joining us. That's if you want to subscribe there. So now you think about what do Iranians now does Iran have now any fear moving forward after the talks in Rome? And that is not an easy question for us to answer. This is not a yes or no question. It's not. It's because when you consider the conversation that took place the week before in Muscat, which is the capital of Amman, versus the one that took place in Rome. The one back in Muscat were categorized as, and I put this in quote, positive and constructive, end of quote. Yeah, of course, it was the first time. So, however, when you think about the location of the second round, that's when it sparked a dispute. Because why? Is now quickly revealing the discrepancy that exists, that Tehran has attributed to contradictory and conflicting positions on part of the United States. So what is important about this? And here it is. There was, after the talks, some indications emerged that now moving forward, the talks might end up being held in a European country. Of course, the Iranians said, hold on a second. Who are you to decide unilaterally where the next talks is going to be? That's one. Second, what that signals. Because we need to understand, and here is the thing, guys, if the talks are held in Europe, we have influence over Europe. Look at what's going on with the Ukraine conflict. Look how we subdue all the Europeans, no exception. Hungary to a degree, but even Hungary ended up not standing by on the right side of history when it allowed the plane of the Prime Minister of Israel, who is wanted by the ICC, to land without issuing an arrest. And that tells me right there, Mr. Orban is also playing both sides. So, but to be fair, we gotta be fair where fairness is due, or give credit where credit is due. So if the talks are in Europe, we will influence that direction. However, Iranians are saying no. The agreement was made that Oman will be hosting the talks, and we're gonna stick to that. So, and this is why Oman, the capital of Muscat, the capital of Oman, announced on Thursday, which was the 16 or 17, that, by the way, the next talks, and next round of talks is not going to be in Muscat, is going to be in Rome. So, and that makes you just wonder what's going on with that. So, and this is why sort of Washington now is staying silent on the location of the. Actually, Washington didn't disclose the talks about the second round that will be in Rome, only because the vice president flew to Italy on Friday, the day before the talk. Read between the lines, guys. Read between the lines. But again, when you see this behavior, if you are on the Iranian side, you will be asking yourself, why the contradictory? This is not a good sign, because this is the inconsistency of the American possessions. So, and this is, again, you start to think about the diversion. This to me is an indication of the diversion possessions of the US, which means it has no intentions of moving honestly negotiating. And we all know how it is with the American government. Simple as that. Because here is the thing, and I had a chance to read the statement issued by the Iranian foreign ministry spokesperson. His name is Ismail Baqi. I looked at a picture of his. He's the foreign. Ismail Baqi. Here is that picture of his right here. So I had a chance to read his statements that's released from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And I quote here because I found it very specific. Here is what he wrote. Such behavior, meaning that the United States flip-flopping on the location, such behavior could be interpreted as an indication of lack of seriousness and good faith. He added, we are still in the testing phase, end of quote, which means they're just testing each other's accuracy, seriousness, intentions, and so forth. And this is where, and I couldn't agree more with him when he gave the analogy in soccer, in football, not American football, but even for us, American football. If you change the goalposts, that becomes a problem. And here is what he wrote, very, very measured. In football, changing the goalpost is a professional error and an unfair act. This is what Baqi wrote in a post on X, Twitter, that is, on Wednesday. He wrote, and I quote, in a diplomacy, adopting such approach, which is promoted by extremists who lack understanding, logic, and national negotiation skills risk sabotaging any start. End of quote. He is spot on. We can't be changing the horses in the middle of the race. We agreed that we're going to hold the talks in Oman. Then that's what you keep the talking. You keep the negotiations till either we reach an agreement or we part ways. So, and this is again, it's because the United States did not like Oman's independence, meaning neutrality. Oman is neutral. It's not a siding with Iran or siding with the Americans. And we didn't like that. So that is one of the problems that the US seems to be having. And moving forward with this, you're going to now to think about regarding these locations, because it's very, very serious. When you start just flipping locations at the whim of your desire, no, it doesn't work that way. Because now this one here shows the lack of trust between both countries, Iran and the Americans. I'm not surprised. I argued this back then, that the Iranians not going to trust the Americans. Yes, they might sit with negotiations, indirect ones. This is the reason why they wanted to hold the talks indirectly. So, and that is again why you need to understand why Washington is asking for face-to-face negotiations with Iran, but Iran is refusing, and rightly so. Because here's the thing. If you are to think about why all of a sudden switching from Muscat to Rome, what objective could the Americans have into that? Well, that is a tactic to pressure Iranians. Because here is the thing. If you were able to do this, what you're going to do next? You know, even the possibility that Washington might demand a change of the mediator and or sponsor in the future. You all see where this is going. Because so far, Oman is being neutral. Oman is sitting between the two, of course, in the separate halls, and taking the information from the Iranian side. And so I used to get involved in stuff like this, usually with foreign languages between high-ranking officials from both sides, the US and the whatever country we're dealing with. And of course, my role was to specifically ensure that what this party is saying, it's exactly what this party is hearing. You can't add or deduct or just translate it according to your whim, whatever. No, it doesn't work that way. This is exactly what neutrality is. So, and this is again why Iranians are refusing the direct talks with the Americans. So, because the thing is, for the Americans, what they couldn't achieve militarily, they understand. Washington understand that we won't be able to defeat the Iranians. So what we're going to try to do is we're trying to achieve this in a different way. How? By imposing demands on the negotiating table, which would make the opposite view. It moves on an orchestrated of suspicion. This is what I believe why the Americans wants to change the venue of the negotiations. And this is why Americans are pushing quietly. And I want to rule that out. But again, I don't see Iranians agreeing to that. Because if they do, then that's it. That's it. As the saying goes, you give them an inch, they will take a foot. You give an American an inch, they will take a foot. However, the American government will insist on transferring the negotiations to a European country because we can control Europe. Europe is useless anyway, and we control it. So the concern or the fear for the United States had is because Oman, Oman is closer proximity to Iran. But even with that, so what? Oman is being neutral. There is no, I don't see any. So, and what comes in all this to highlight to you why we don't even have a strategy? You know, Donald Trump, it just goes with whatever the wind is blowing. That's how it works. And what am I referring to here? I am referring to the leaked documents when Donald Trump sort of thwarting an Israeli plan to strike Iran's nuclear sites in May next month. I don't buy that. I don't buy that, because here is why. Donald Trump will dare to go against Israel. Tell you this straightforward. Could he disclose that to put pressure on Israel to agree to whatever the US will agree with Iran? Maybe, maybe not. But it was Donald Trump who disclosed or thwarted rather the plan that Israel was planning to attack Iran. It's nonsense, first of all, because Israel will not be able to strike on its own. He can't attack Iran on its own. It doesn't have the means to do it. So, and that is why you're going to have to understand the talks that took place in Rome was nothing but just reading between the lines and weighing the options. Because when you weigh the options, you're going to have to decipher facts from fictions. And in negotiations, you're going to have to know the reality from just the hypes, what the Americans are saying versus what is really on the ground. Of course, Iran is aware of all this. Iran is aware of the military buildup in the region. But Iran is also preparing and putting things in place. All the defensive missile systems are in place, by the way. And I'm going to be sharing some pictures with you as I move forward. And this is just in case the path from negotiations divert into a military trajectory. So once again, that's why I asked that question. Is a war coming to Iran? Iran is not scared of it, but also we need to understand the ramifications of this. So, and this, what triggers all this now is that the tone that took place in Muscat, the capital of Oman, during the first phase, is very different from the tone that took place in Rome. And especially when it comes down to the uranium enrichment. Yeah. And that is, again, where you start to see the divisions that exist, not only within the US, but also between the US and Israel. And I'm going to get into all this as I move forward, because there is one particular thing I need you to know. All this comes on the heels of three, or against the backdrop of three main things. And I'm going to share with you. The first one, it has to do with the Russian factor. This might surprise you to a degree, because here is the thing. While all this happening, there is a question that loomed large. As a geopolitical analyst, you're going to have to think outside the box. And that thinking is pertaining to whether Russia could move away from Iran to get closer to Washington. Because you might think, oh, no, that ain't going to happen. Whatever. You don't. In geopolitics, it doesn't work that way. It works as far as the strategic interest, the national strategic interest. So, of course, Moscow will always support Iran against the Americans and the European pressure, as long as there are certain conditions met. And I'm going to share just a few with you and move on with that. So think about it. For example, I'll give you a few examples. That the Russians will want to ensure that Iran's negotiations with the Americans do not lead to Tehran distancing itself from Moscow. In other words, that whatever concession the Americans will make will not allure Iranians to this side away from the Russians. That's one. That's how Russians will think, and rightly so. Second example I'll give you. You can consider, as long as the negotiations between the Iranians and the Americans do not lead to an escalation of tensions. Why? Because you are going to be looking at the realignment of interests of the Russians. And the Russians worked very hard to establish their influence in West Asia. The third example I will give you is that as long as this does not negatively impact Russia's partnerships with Arab countries in the region. And the last example I'll give you about this is that Moscow interests are taken into account in any negotiations with the West. So, because you're going to have to consider all this. So, as I mentioned to you earlier, guys, I had a chance to write a book about Iran, to those you all know by now. And I told you I will share an excerpt with you. So here is what I wrote pertaining to this one here. Will the support of Russia and China help Iran challenge the status quo, not only in the Persian Gulf, but also in the greater Middle East? How will the main allies of the United States in the region, like Saudi Arabia, Jordan, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, etc., react to Iran's growing influence? These questions are at the heart of U.S. foreign policy moving forward. The grandiose plans that the Washington establishment made during the Shah era faded the moment he was overthrown. That's exactly what I argued back then. In other words, U.S. policy that used to have, it's not going to be holding anymore because the geopolitical landscape has shifted, and with the U.S. not at the heart of it, because as a matter of fact, has shifted not to the liking of the United States. It's a reality. So that was the first one. Now, the second point in all this, remember, I told you all this comes on the heels of three main things. The first one was Russia. And the second one has to do with Steve Witkoff, the guy who is leading the negotiations. I have a shared picture with you here, and I give credit to Reuters for this. This is Steve Witkoff. Now, for Steve, you know, I don't know how much the guy deals with real estate and all that stuff. Diplomacy is a different ball game altogether. So it won't matter. Here is the thing with what happened with Steve Witkoff now. Now he appears sort of to accept a cap on the uranium enrichment. That's what he said first. Suddenly he flipped because there is a post. I wish I didn't get it. I'm sorry, guys, but I am aware of it. There is a post on X, on Twitter, on social media, that he disclosed that now Iran has to give up all uranium enrichment. So makes you just wonder how you flip from, you go from accepting a cap on Iran's uranium enrichment to giving up all. Iran has to give up all its uranium enrichment. So to me, it became like Witkoff took about face. Yeah. And that's, to me, right there, it gives the Iranian sort of a pause into, this is why we are not going to negotiate directly with the Americans, because you don't want to give the Americans that opportunity. And second, we're going to have to move carefully. And that's exactly what the Iranians are doing. So Because here is the thing that Wirikov didn't think about. For Iran, civilian nuclear, Iran enrichment of uranium, which is, by the way, it's a sovereign right, because Iran is part of the NPT, Non-Proliferation Treaty Organization. So they have the right. And that's, once again, the shifting position sort of, I'm sure Iranians will look at it like, wait a minute, how do we interpret this? As an insult? As a dictation? That the Americans dictating to us to hold all enrichment uranium? What happened to our sovereignty? So, and that's, to me, it's not a good sign for what lies ahead, in my opinion. So, and this is, again, what's going to make Iranian pause and reflect. And once again, I need you to remember, this is not the Americans speaking. This is the Americans speaking on behalf of Israel. You know, it's not a secret, guys. Everybody knows it. So, and the third element, it has to do with the trip by this guy to Iran. Now, who is this guy? This is the Saudi defense minister. His name is Prince Khalid bin Salman Al Saud. Has no clue in the military whatsoever. And the guy was born in 1988. You know, you got the idea. So, by the way, I give credit to the for that picture to the Iranian Army office. That's their pictures. Now, this guy, he's the grandson of the founder of Saudi Arabia, King Abdulaziz. And he is the 10th child and the 9th son of King Salman. He's the younger brother of MBS. But here is the shocking thing about this guy. The CIA, in CIA's leaks assessment, and it's, again, not classified. Prince Khalid, this guy you are looking at here, right here, this guy, he was involved in the assassination of this guy. You guys know who this is? Can anybody type in the chat box who this person is? Let me see. I know it takes a while to show up here. Oh, Idris. Sorry, where are you? Idris Williams. You got it. That's Jamal Khashoggi. That is correct. That is correct. So it's Jamal Khashoggi. So, and instructing Khashoggi to go to the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, where Khashoggi was subsequently strangled and dismembered. So, but anyway, this is not the point. My point into this, you have to understand this dynamics as to what's going on, because the Saudis were very concerned. Because remember, if it weren't for China, the Saudis were, you know, because remember, Saudi Arabia, and again, when I wrote the Saudi book, I detailed all this. As a matter of fact, guys, I am even thinking of doing a show for you about this. Would you like me to do this? Yes or no? Would you like me to provide you my own analysis about the Saudi defense minister visit to Iran only a day and a half prior to the U.S.-Iran negotiations in Rome, Italy? So just if you will be kind and just answer in the chat box, and I will take it up from there. So here's what I need you to know. Saudi Arabia, along with other Gulf states, Arab states that is, the useless ones anyway, all of them, have been wary of getting embroiled in Iran's conflict with Israel and the United States. Well, of course, they are concerned. Why? They're concerned because they know they're going to become a target if any attack is launched from their soil, because Iran made it clear. And all Iran's missiles are within reach. And even the Patriot missile system, the defense one that the Saudis have, was useless against the Houthis. This is why the Saudis, along with Qatar, United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Bahrain, you name it, They are useless. Jordan, all of them. I mean, tell me right now if any of them has the gut to take stand regarding what's going on in Gaza. None. No, it's just Egypt, Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, you name it. You name it. So here is what happened. Last year, of course, Iran exchanged strikes with Israel. You'll remember, and I covered this one for you. So what happened is that the Arab states in the region, the Gulf, have expressed concern to the US about a potential attack by Israel on Iranian oil facilities. Yeah, like they care for Iran. No. They care about the revenues for their survival, for the survival of the monarchies. Remember, those countries in the Gulf, whatever, they're controlling the resources. The citizens are not having much of that. Yeah, they do give them a stipend, whatever, but that's like a crumbs. That's what they do. So they were concerned about the survival of the monarchies, because if unemployment goes out of control, if poverty starts to become the norm, people is going to say, we're done with this monarchy here. That's why those Gulf Arab countries expressed their concern to the US, so the US can pressure Israel. But this has nothing to do. I read some analysis that says, oh, the Arab states were, the Gulf Arab states were concerned about economic and environmental impact. No, that's BS. They care less for that. They worry about their survival. Because here is the thing, because Iran publicly warned that any party seen as aiding or helping Israel will be treated as aggressor, and rightly so. Because I'm going to share a map with you if I have it. I think I do. And just an overview, guys. Just an overview. Take a look here. Just look at here. For Israel to go to attack Iran, he has to go through some airspace of some Arab countries. You have Iraq, you have Saudi Arabia, you have Jordan, then you have the Gulf. This is what it's all about. The Saudis' defense minister trip to Iran ain't about relationship, strengthening, whatever. No. They are concerned, and they wanted to test the water to see how far Iran is willing to go. And of course, Iran's not going to disclose that. It would be a mistake if you trust the Saudis. That would be a mistake. So this is what's happening. Now, there is one other point that you need to know, and this one has to do with the disaster and the division that exists inside Israel with all this. Because remember, Israel is vehemently opposing any talks between the Americans and the Iranians, because Israel wants to remain the only power with the nukes in the Middle East or West Asia. And once again, I think Iran should have moved forward years ago and declare whatever, and that's it. You will see. We will not dare to threaten them. The same arguments I make about North Korea. So, and here is what's concerning about Israel. What's concerning about it is that the head of the, and I'm not going to get into the weeds of it, because their system, for example, their Supreme Court. Now, their Supreme Court is refusing the dismissal of the head of the Shabak. His name is Barr. I think I have a picture of his. You need to understand this dynamics, guys, because it will make more sense to you. I think I have a picture. No, I don't. Sorry, guys. The head of Shabak. Anyway, he is now, no, the Supreme Court said the government cannot dismiss the guy. And even now, you have Lipid. Lipid is one who was in the government. He is now arguing publicly that Israel is headed for a disaster. And soon you're going to be seeing political assassinations are coming. Because there is a mass division that exists inside Israel. And all this plays a role into why the Americans wants to flip the venue of the negotiations with Iran regarding the nuclear program into Europe. Because if we do in Europe, we have more control over the outcome that way. So, and this is again where that classified report has came out as far as the on April 17th, just like a few days ago, why Mr. Trump blocked Israeli plan to strike Iran nuclear sites. They won't be able to go, because remember, and I disclosed this before, Israel already tried to target certain, and they did some, but not the facilities. They couldn't go deeper inside. Why? It's because the Iran defense missile systems and also the radars, because the Israelis couldn't jam the communications for the Iranians. So Israel knew not to go deeper. Yeah, they went out some, and I confirmed this with someone I know, but it was nothing. So that's why Iranians didn't even talk much about it. So when Israel said, oh, we're gonna go, or even Trump said, I have blocked Israel plan to strike Iran's nuclear sites, those are very, very deep in the mountains, and it's not gonna be easy to get into. It's not gonna be easy to get into. So that's the way I see it, because here is the reason why. And I'm gonna share a picture with you of a specific missile. This one here, and this is, by the way, this is a new type in its development. Iran already had some of this. What you're looking at what's called Sayad 3. That's an Arabic word for the English translation is hunter. Sayad 3. And this is one of the 2 new air defense systems for Iran. So Israel is aware, and they are, by the way, Sayad 1, Sayad 2, Sayad 3. They even have Sayad 4. I looked it up and read up a little bit on it. Let me see a picture. Yes, I do have it. And this one has 2 main things to it. You know, more range, meaning distance, and the other thing has to do with the maneuverability. That's what it is. Take a look here, guys. Right there. So Iran already developed all this. So, and let alone the radar systems are very, very, very strong. So this is why, then no matter what you hear, it just don't fall for it. That's the reason why I wanted to do this for you guys. I'm going to put a link for you guys. You can read up on this later on, should you decide to do so. And again, because of the community, I am very concerned as to when you start. You know, I read and I watch and I hear this. You know, when things don't make any sense, it becomes my responsibility to ensure that our community at least have the facts. And of course, as I always say, guys, that's my rule. You reach your own conclusion. You might disagree with me, and that's fine. And of course, I welcome that, because that's how we develop ideas. That's how we exchange. That's how we learn. You don't have to agree with me, of course. So now, we're not talking only about the division that exists in Israel. We're talking about divisions that exist in American government. And what am I referring to? I am referring to 2 individuals right here, 2 neocons. Oh, I have a picture of the head of the Shabbat right here. I knew I did. This is Ronan Bar. So he's still in his possession. So, and it will be a mistake of Netanyahu to dismiss him, because security services are so. But anyway, the division that exists in the United States, we do have division also, and it's very, very important. Why? Because you have 2 individuals. It's one of them. Wait, I thought I had the picture. Let me see. I'm looking to see if I kept the picture. Maybe I didn't. No, I didn't. My apologies, guys. Anyway, Two individuals, Mike Waltz, the National Security Advisor, and Rubio, the Secretary of State. Two neocons, two warmongers that they are pushing towards a war with Iran. You know, the president, Donald Trump, that's Donald Trump. So, but you have to understand this reality. So given this division that exists within the U.S. national security team, and especially with these two, Rubio and Mike Waltz, over how to deal with Iran, and prevent it from acquiring nuclear weapons, and so and you start to think in terms of where this is moving forward. That's why the Iranians will have to think twice about how much can we even deal with the Americans, and what makes you even certain that by the time you reach a deal with the Americans, only next 2 years or 3, the next president will turn it over. This is one of the flaws of our systems. We can hold our end of the bargain. And that's, again, why I am convinced moving forward in these talks, it's going to be in one of those atmospheres of optimism and sort of pessimism or cautionary reactions and so forth. Because that's the only way I see it. You can't think and, I mean, it will even, in my opinion, this will reach a point where sort of it will collapse on its own. Because we put in now more restrictions on the Iranians that what makes us think they're going to agree? We haven't succeeded in bringing them down since the revolution. What makes us think we're going to succeed today? Trump, rhetoric, and all that stuff is not going to cut it. Iran today is not Iran of 30 years. The same arguments I make about China. China's today is not China's of 20 years ago. And that's why Mr. Trump was shocked as to how China has responded to his tariffs policies. He didn't see that coming. And again, that's an indication of the imminent collapse of the empire. It pains me to say this is my country. Do I wish my country will develop and all that? Yes, I do, because we can't deny this. But again, I will not shy away from criticizing when my country does wrong, because that is the right thing to do. You put your emotions aside. That's like differentiating between what's right and what's wrong. You can be cherry picking only when it suits you. You can't turn blind eye on this and say, oh, it's only this. If you are to present an argument, an analysis, an objective one, you provide both sides of the argument and let people decide. So, and of course, I am more now realizing maybe Mr. Trump's rhetoric for the we're going to have to pressure hard if you don't come to the negotiating table, whatever, turns out to be this pressure on Iran didn't work. Because one of the demands was we want to have direct talks, Iran saying no. And now I will be keeping my eyes open as to whether the talks is going to go back to Oman or not. And I bet you if Iran ever agree to changing the venue, then they are setting themselves for bad outcome. Because you don't want to negotiate with the Americans from a weak position. This is where China is, because China now is in a strong position. So it doesn't need. So that's why Mr. Trump is kind of waiting on a phone call from Mr. Xi. I don't think so it will ever happen. Ain't gonna happen. Keep waiting, because you didn't think through of your decisions, and it's affecting an entire country. This is not about ego. This is not about, because what he was thinking is about his image per se, disregarding the welfare of the entire country. Anyway, now there is one more point, 2 more points I need to talk about this, and I'll end it here. So, as I mentioned, the Vice President J.D. Vance visited Rome. He was in Rome on the eve of the talks between Iran. What would you go to Rome for? To give them the talking points? So And that is exactly why you need to start to think about how much the Washington wants to influence the course of these talks by now trying to push the narrative towards having European country holds the negotiations. Iran will be making a grave mistake if they ever agree to this. And the war, yes, they're gonna. Iran is ready for it. Iran is prepared, and the consequences for us also is not gonna be nice, and the consequences for the regional countries, it's not gonna be pretty. So, and here is the thing that media didn't disclose openly, is that Oman, the capital I'm sorry, Muscat, which is the capital of Oman. Oman rejected the American demand for media coverage. Yeah. During the first round, Oman didn't agree. The Americans tried to pressure Oman because, the coverage, the media, misleading stuff. This is, again, why I decided to do this, because it's my, it's our community. I got to protect to make sure you are not being misled into a different outcome when you hear about the topic. Because one thing you need to understand, that whatever, you need to pay close attention to these negotiations and so forth, because the outcome will impact you one way or another. I hope it never gets to a war. And this is, again, why we wanted to change the venue, because we couldn't influence the publicity of it. That's why I said, when they in the West saying, oh, the negotiations were constructive and positive, I'll take a step back and think twice about that. I know better. So, and this is where, when the Americans are pressing for direct talks while the Iranians saying, no, we're going to maintain the indirect talks. That's how. And because Iran believes in Oman's neutrality. And that in itself has sort of irritated the Americans. We didn't like it, because we wanted now to change the playing field, per se. I mean, we are not even talking now about replacing the mediators. No. Who are we? And I'm going to bring you to my last point, and this one has to do with, because remember, Iran's fear stems from experience. What am I referring to here? I am referring to 2015, when the US security agencies and others were spying on the Iranian delegations regarding the nuclear agreement. So I have a picture here of what's his name, former president, and I give credit to Behruz Mehri. That's his picture, for Hassan Rouhani, because remember, it was during Hassan Rouhani when the JCPOA was reached. We were spying on the Iranian delegations, and and of course we all know the NSA, the National Security Agency. I'm sure they are listening to what I'm saying here, but again, I'm not saying something that is not out there. Spying on foreign leaders, like the Iranian former president Hassan Rouhani, and that was even during the UN General Assembly in New York. So as a matter of fact, I'm aware of a top secret document, but again, it's declassified, but it was classified back then. So the top secret report on a previous NSA operation against Iran's UN delegation illustrated just how extensive this electronic surveillance can be. So, and this document, by the way, was obtained by another news outlet here in the US, and it showed that the US bugged the hotel rooms and phones of the Iranian president at that time, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, and his entire delegation of 143 members back in 2007. I mean, you all know we spied on Angela Merkel. We were listening to her cell phone. This is an ally. So, yeah, Israelis do it for the Americans. When some of us used to travel to Israel, those hotel rooms were bugged and all that stuff. That's just nothing. And I disclosed this in my when I did my presentations. Of course, the unclassified side of that. So I usually, because sometimes I give presentations to private audiences here. So here's a link to my speaking, and I did it for military, high-ranking military officials. You know, sometimes we disclose, but not the classified side, because I'm bound by the law. Simple as that. So, and now this is where you start to realize you take both the divisions that exist in Israel, the divisions that exist in the US. And interesting enough is that in the US is the war hawks like Rubio. Or Rubio, if you look at his career, how he got to where he is, who was funding him in Congress, in the Senate, whatever. It was the AIPAC. So, and this is where you are seeing now, as a matter of fact, the change to Washington's position regarding now the Steve Witkoff saying Iran has to dismantle all its nuclear program and all that. This one has to do with a meeting between Israeli Minister of Strategic Affairs, his name is Ron Dinner, and the Mossad director, his name is David Bernia. They met with the U.S. envoy Witkoff just a day before his meeting in Rome. And where did he meet? They didn't meet in Italy. They met in Paris. So, once again, and this is where you have to understand. I couldn't wait to do this for you guys, because you need to understand all this, what's going on. And even I'll go as far as having even a former Secretary of State. You know, the guy was never fit for that position. Pompeo, right here. And I wrote some articles about him back then. So even for him, it was kind of didn't make sense. And here is what Pompeo is saying. And I will provide you the link. Actually, I'm going to put the link for you guys. You can read it later on, should you decide to do so. Here is what Pompeo is saying. Pompeo is saying that the Trump administration, sort of the negotiations with Iran, is the weakest strategic point in decades. And the president hands could not be stronger. So therefore, this is again what Pompeo is saying. Therefore, an agreement that permits Iran, this is his word, and I'm quoting here, permit Iran to continue with its current nuclear rate of development is not a deal worth making, according to the former CIA director. Instead, similarly to what he shared in 2018, Pompeo argued a new accord with Tehran should be based on three main conditions. Just take a listen at this. Iran destroying all uranium enrichment sites. 2, stop providing political, military, and financial support to its proxies. And 3, striking a peace deal with its Gulf Arab neighbors, along with doing away with the Islamic Revolution Guard Corps. End of wishful thinking, if I may add, because what makes him think that Iran's going to even agree to any of this, let alone what is the role of Pompeo into all this to begin with? You know, disaster policies that he pursued back then. So that's why I don't quite understand where he is moving forward. So, and I'm going to end this, guys, with an excerpt from my Iran book, just to put once again things in perspective.
Cool, Fig. Follow me.